This is a brief version of the on-screen disclaimer. This channel shares my personal memories and perspectives as accurately as I can recall them, supported by my own records where possible. Names and identifying details have been changed for privacy and safety. This content is for educational and healing purposes only. Some material may be difficult. Please take care of yourself and seek support if needed. When safety plans meet reality, the unannounced return. Copyright 2025, happilyeverafterabuse.com. All rights reserved. Narrated by Delisha Brown for Happily Ever After Abuse. Before we begin, take one steady breath in through the nose. Inhale, out through the mouth. Safety planning is often described as the end of fear. In truth, it is the beginning of learning how trauma can test even the best plan. Part 1. Bailey's Alarm. At 8:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, March 7th, 2021, I was asleep in my bedroom when Bailey, our family dog, barked with the deep, urgent tone that signals an unfamiliar presence. Confused, I rose and cautiously walked to the front door. Moments later, I saw Dolus's vehicle in the driveway. My heart dropped. We had agreed he would arrive the following day, Monday, March 8th. His appearance a day early, without notice, broke the first rule of my safety plan. Confusion shifted quickly to fear. The plan I had built with my therapist and support team was based on predictability and distance. That structure was gone. Dr. Judith Herman reminds us that safety is a dynamic process, not a static state. When the unexpected happens, the body reactivates its old code: appease, survive, restore control through compliance. That reflex would soon define my next choices. Part 2. The Psychology of the Door. Through the window, I saw him waiting, expression flat, shoulders square. I knew that if I did not respond, he might escalate, pounding, shouting, or trying the decoy key I had switched before his Valentine's Day departure. My children were sleeping. The law was on my side. In my state, an individual who has been removed from a shared residence and enters without consent commits domestic criminal trespass. Yet law does not still the amygdala. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains how the survival brain overrides logic when danger feels imminent. I opened the door not from permission, but from a neural memory that whispered, "Keep him calm." Allowing entry was not a choice made in freedom. It was a manifestation of what trauma therapist Dr. Pete Walker calls the fawn response: appeasing to prevent harm. Part 3. The Conversation. Dolus stepped inside as though the interim weeks had never happened. His first words were practical, not greeting, but control. Questions about mail, bills, and the house. His tone was accusatory beneath civility. When I reminded him that our meeting was scheduled for the next day, he shrugged, a gesture that communicated ownership, not apology. Dr. Evan Stark, in his research on coercive control, observed that unscheduled arrivals often serve as tests of access. By arriving early, Dulles asserted that my boundaries were still his to violate. His conversation shifted quickly to the house itself, its value, its future. He reminded me of his financial strain and insisted that selling would help us both. Dr. Ramani Durvasula identifies this pattern as a form of narcissistic supply management. The abuser frames personal relief as mutual benefit, turning compassion into currency. I heard the familiar undertone. If you do not help me, you are selfish. That message has kept many survivors ensnared long after escape. Part 4. Upstairs. Without request or announcement, he headed upstairs to the children's rooms. The act was casual, habitual, and that was its power. Dr. Stark explained that coercive control depends on entitlement performed as normalcy. By moving freely through our space, he reestablished symbolic dominance. This is still mine. Why did I allow it? Because to stop him would risk a scene the children could not emotionally absorb. My decision reflected what Dr. Bruce Perry and Dr. Dan Siegel describe as relational safety, a protective instinct that values peace over principle when others are watching. Without knocking, he entered our sleeping children's rooms as though nothing had changed, using the same parental authority that had previously been absolute. For children raised under coercive control, such moments reactivate obedience conditioning. I would later learn that Isis feigned deep sleep to avoid interaction, while her brother Suchus was frightened into submission by the unexpected sight of his father hovering over his bed when he opened his eyes. The children were unsure which rules now applied. Part 5. The Final Demands. Back downstairs, the discussion returned to money, his bills, the mortgage, the cost of keeping a house he no longer occupied. He insisted that the responsibility to sell or refinance was mine alone. Research on economic abuse, led by Jody Postmus, demonstrates that financial pressure often continues after physical separation. It serves two functions: to maintain contact and to induce guilt. By making me responsible for his financial comfort, Dulles recentered himself as the decision maker and framed my independence as burden. Dr. Shahida Arabi notes that this form of projection, blaming the survivor for the consequences of the abuser's choices, is a common post narcissistic pattern. It keeps the victim defensive and explaining instead of asserting boundaries. Part 6. The Blame and Deflection. When I expressed discomfort with his tone, he shifted to accusation and indicating that I was making the situation harder than it had to be. The statement was surgical. It redirected responsibility away from his unannounced arrival and to my reaction to it. Dr. Jennifer Freyd's research on Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, explains how abusers invert narratives to maintain control. His statement was a textbook example. In response, I felt the old urge to justify myself, to prove that I was not the problem. That urge is what Dr. Brene Brown describes as the shame trap, when self protection masquerades as self explanation. It took me years to learn that silence can be safer than debate with someone committed to misunderstanding you. Part 7, Taking Sutures. Before leaving, Dolus announced he was taking sutures with him for the morning. My instinct was to object, but fear and conditioning collided. If I refused, he might escalate in front of the children. If I agreed, I could monitor from a distance. Dr. Judith Herman teaches that in chronic abuse, the victim's agency becomes calibrated to minimize harm rather than to seek freedom. That is why I nodded instead of resisted. He left the house with our son, and the air felt both lighter and thinner. A temporary peace shadowed by fear of what conversation he might start next. Part 8, The Call with Millie. During that morning outing, Dolus phoned his mother, Millie, and placed the call on speaker so that she, he, and Suchus could talk together. The topic was me, my mother, my history, my perceived faults. There were 9 points they discussed, each one designed to shape Suchus's view of me. Family systems pioneer and researcher Dr. Salvador Minuchin describes this as triangulation, when a parent recruits a child into adult conflict to relieve their own anxiety and gain allegiance. Dr. Shahida Arabi refers to this practice as parental grooming, when a narcissistic parent controls the narrative by rewriting family history through the child's ears. The questions were strategic, probing, suggestive, subtly accusing. They place Suchus in the impossible position of judge and confidant. Developmental specialist Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson note that children exposed to such alliances often experience divided loyalties and internalized guilt. When Dolus later left for the day, Suchus quietly shared what had been said, fragments of questions and comments still echoing in his mind. His tone carried the confusion of a child made witness to adult conflict. Part 9, The Mail and the Return Pretext. When Dolus returned to the home later that morning with Suchus, he asked whether any mail had arrived for him, despite having already looked through the stack on the counter. It was a small, practiced move. Dr. Evan Stark's research on coercive control describes how abusers often create legitimate reasons to return: mail, forgotten items, unfinished business, maintaining a thread of access disguised as practicality. After his inquiry about the mail, he departed once more, leaving behind a tension that lingered even after the door closed. My trauma therapist later described it as the loop, every question a hook for the next visit. Part 10: The College 529 Plans. That evening, the second act of manipulation unfolded through money. This time, Dolus's father, Philly, entered the dynamic. In an email sent directly to Suchus, Philly, the children's grandfather and the sole contributor to their College 529 plans, explained that his college funds would be available only if he included his father in every step and excluded me. Research on economic abuse by Dr. Adrian Adams identifies this behavior as asset leveraging, using promised resources to control behavior. Involving Suchus transferred that control to the next generation. Philly went further, instructing Suchus to tell his sister Isis that unless she changed her attitude and behavior, she would not receive her college funds. For Isis, who was to graduate high school 3 months later, that money represented her future. Dr. Ramani Durvasula and Dr. Judith Herman both explained that this tactic, reward and punishment through affection or access, mirrors the cycle of coercive control itself, alternating generosity and deprivation to maintain psychological dependence. It was, in effect, financial conditioning masked as family planning. Part 11: Parental Alienation Irony. Soon after, Dolus sent Suchus an email containing 4 articles about parental alienation and toxic parents. The irony was bitter. Legal scholar Joan Mayer notes that accusations of alienation are frequently weaponized by abusive parents to deflect accountability. By sending that material, he reversed roles, portraying himself and Philly as victims of manipulation while they were, in truth, shaping my children's perceptions. Dr. Jennifer Freyd's Darvo model again applies: deny the abuse, attack the victim's credibility, and reverse victim and offender. The message reinforced their narrative. I was the problem. They were the rescuers. Part 12: The Hotel Video. Later that evening, Dolus texted Suchus a video of the hotel room where he and the children were planned to stay. It looked clean, spacious, almost inviting. To an outsider, it might appear benign, but the intent was performative. Sociologist Dr. Irving Goffman described this as impression management, the construction of an image to influence perception. By sending that video, Dolus framed himself as competent, responsible, and generous, a contrast to the unreasonable mother he depicted to our son. For survivors, these gestures can destabilize reality. What is seen appears safe. What is felt is threat. That dissonance is the hallmark of psychological abuse. Part 13: Fear and Legal Reflection. When the day finally ended, I sat in silence, aware that my safety plan had collapsed under the weight of conditioning and coercion. My trauma therapist was on call, ready to help me relocate if danger reemerged. I documented every action: his unannounced entry, the manipulation of the children, the financial threats. Documentation, my therapist reminded me, is both evidence and empowerment. Under my state's laws, I had the right to refuse entry. The fact that I did not exercise it was a symptom of trauma, not consent. Dr. Judith Herman writes that survivors often confuse endurance with consent. That single line reframed my guilt. I had not failed my safety plan. I had enacted it with the tools trauma had left me. Let us reflect. 3 weeks after liberation, safety met reality, and reality revealed how trauma can rewrite instinct. What I once saw as weakness, I now understand as survival. For other survivors, know this: a single decision made in fear does not erase your progress. Awareness grows through experience, and every re entry teaches the mind how to hold the door closed next time without apology. Freedom is not an event, it is practice. It begins again each morning you decide to stay safe, stay aware, and stay here. Sincere thoughts from me to you. This narrative is true. It reflects my lived experience from a single day that revealed how deeply trauma shapes instinct and how survival sometimes means responding in ways we only understand in hindsight. The details are shared as they occurred, not dramatized, not minimized, simply acknowledged. I did not write this to reopen wounds, but to offer recognition to anyone who has ever questioned why they froze, complied, opened the door, or made a choice they later second guessed. You are not alone. Trauma rewires response long before it ever rewrites memory, and those reflexes were shaped to protect you. If you are in the process of leaving or have left and find yourself shaken by unexpected encounters, know this: a moment of fear does not undo your freedom. A single breach does not define your strength. Every step you take towards safety, even the trembling ones, is evidence of your resilience. Take one steady breath. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to begin again. Your story is not diminished by the ways trauma once directed your choices. Your story is strengthened by the fact that you are still here to tell it.